I've broken this up in chunks, so if you're looking at this portion of the video, I want to thank you for listening to my poem Communion, which I would have shared on a previous video. And in case you're just tuning in, there is a trigger alert for both this topic and for the poem Communion that I shared in a previous video. I want to give a little background into this poem. The reason why I wrote the poem Communion was dealing with the notion, the metaphor of communion as a sacrifice of Jesus's blood and Jesus's body, and how it didn't occur to me until 2014 that every rape is not a violent rape in terms of being battered and beaten. There are different forms of sexual assault, and my rape was, if you can call it, a non-violent sexual assault. I didn't know what to do with it back then, because I assumed that all rapes meant that I had to have been physically battling with the person, and then the person will have overpowered me and attacked me. That's not exactly what happened with mine, and so I didn't know how to define it. I didn't know what to do with that experience. I didn't know what that meant for who I was. I didn't know how to process what safety and security meant, and I certainly didn't know how to process what that meant about how I was defining my sexual safety. And so what it ended up feeling like was offering myself up, but in a kind of sacrifice that was an unwanted sacrifice. I felt broken and violated and naked and alone and isolated and empty and used, but I didn't know how to define that. And so years later, when I saw what happened with the Bill Cosby trial, about women who were rendered unconscious and then violated sexually, they too might have had an experience, not exactly like mine, but had an experience where they weren't violently fighting. They might have looked submissive. They walked into the room willingly. So one might have assumed that it's their fault, and it was not, just like it wasn't my fault about what happened to me simply because I didn't physically fight the person who did this, right? And so this poem, Communion, gave me an opportunity to finally say, this is where this unresponsiveness came from. It gave me an opportunity to talk about dissociation. And dissociation is how sometimes when something traumatic happens, what we'll do if our body's not fighting, sometimes what we'll do is our mind will remove itself physically from our bodies and put itself somewhere else. And in my experience with my sexual assault, I dissociated. And that's how I got through the experience. The person who did this in my case was physically huge, and there is no way I could have been able to fight him. And so I blanked out. I remember very little from the actual incident that happened, and so this was my ability to deal with this and to try to, first of all, remind myself, to tell myself this was not my fault. I am a survivor, and to rebuild my strength now that I have a power to define what happened, who I am, and that I have a power of words to reclaim my strength. And so that's what Communion was about. I'm hoping that this is the beginning of maybe creating some dialogue or some conversation about those of us who serve as rocks, who've had these kinds of experiences. We walk in and out of these spaces. We serve as support systems for other people, and oftentimes people don't know what we ourselves have survived. And so if this has provided an opportunity for us, those of us who are rocks, those of us who go to rocks for our support systems, to be able to engage in deeper dialogue about what we all need to not just survive, but to be able to thrive, to be able to consciously and be cognizant of what we need to heal. I'm hoping that this can do this, not just this blog, this vlog, and this poem. And so let's continue to communicate. Let's remember that courage is talking about these kinds of things, that there is a healing involved, that we don't have to stay in a place of cyclical trauma. We can heal, we can get over these things, and we can re-engage in our lives. So thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you are a survivor, I'm right there with you. Let's continue to build up our healing and building up our strength together. in talking about these experiences that we are the supporter of a survivor. I encourage you to just be open to how and when and where they need you. And until next time, thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you.